Hey there, guys. Welcome to the MDs2B Podcast. I hope you guys are all having a great day in these weird times. So, today is the third episode all about the MCAT. So, for those of you who do not know, the MCAT is the medical college admission test. It is offered in the United States and Canada, and it is basically the best analogy would be kind of like the SAT or the ACT, just in regards to med school admissions instead. The major difference that you'll see is that in terms of the difficulty, this is on a completely different scale than the difficulty you might have encountered on the SAT versus ACT. Whereas the SAT or the ACT look to examine your general reasoning skills, your general math skills. It wasn't very content driven. The MCAT is very much different. It will focus on the content and the skills that is expected of a pre-medical education, and they will drive those concepts and skills hard. So what did you guys think of the MCAT when you guys first heard of it?
Obviously, I heard it was a monster that all pre-meds had to conquer, but I went into it, I think I kind of went into it the wrong way, so we're kind of going to be discussing the different ways you can start studying. I kind of thought that, well, the way I've studied in the past is to kind of study the most amount that I could every day in the least amount of time. So that's a way that a lot of students study for it, but what I would recommend is studying probably 3 or 4 months in advance. And I think that'll give you the best shot of covering all the information you need and getting as much practice as you need for the MCAT. What do you think?
Yeah, there's definitely different ways to go about studying for the MCAT. Personally, Teebro and I, we studied together over our winter break, so we basically just studied full-time for about a month and then took the first MCAT date whenever school started back up. And I think that personally that worked really well for me. We're going to go into it about how some people prefer to study with a friend, some people prefer to study alone, but ultimately you have to decide what is best for your study habits and what is going to be the best method for you to succeed.
Okay, so a little bit about our qualifications here. I'm actually a lead instructor for the Exam Crackers company. So basically my day-to-day job is helping kids with the MCAT and making sure that they can succeed. I'm obviously not going to be plugging their product here because that would be a violation of ethics. But I just want to, from my experience with the MCAT, I can personally say, just like Richie said earlier, everyone has their own study schedule that works for them. Although generally I will say my company recommends the same, just don't spread your studying out over too long of a period, like 6 months is a little bit too long, just because that can easily burn you out. Because this MCAT is a completely different caliber of test than what you've encountered in the past. Whereas for your undergrad classes, we've all been there. We've all kind of crammed the night before. And honestly, most of the time it works pretty well for undergrad classes. You'll get away with an A or a B pretty easily doing that. But for the MCAT, if you try cramming it all 2 or 3 weeks before, a lot of the times that can kind of wear you out. At the same time, if you try studying for too long, going at it that pace for like months and months on end, you'll burn yourself out too. And by the time you get to the actual exam, you will have no motivation. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. When I was studying it for the first time, and I kind of studied a month out before my MCAT date, and I could feel closer to my actual test date that I was burnt out, and I went into test day exhausted, and I feel like I didn't prepare as much as I needed to. And that's another big thing when it comes to taking the MCAT. You want to be mentally prepared, but you also can't be worn out tired. So if you've been studying for a month straight and are completely exhausted after that period, even if you studied all the information, you're going to be tired and not perform to the best of your ability on test day. So let's get into a little bit of what's on the MCAT. So the MCAT is divided into 4 sections. The first section is chemistry and physics. The second section is called CARS, which is a reading section. The third section is biochem, and the fourth section is psychology and sociology. Do you want to go into a little bit more about that?
Yeah, of course. So the first and most obvious thing about what makes the MCAT a completely different kind of beast is the pure length of the exam. Overall, the exam takes 7.5 hours to complete, which probably sounds insane compared to most of the undergrad exams you've had. And that's because each section is about 95 to 90 minutes, which is a lot. It may not sound that much right now, but trust me, when you're actually sitting down in that classroom environment, when you're actually sitting down and taking that test, and you're doing these 90-minute sections, it's very easy to get worn out very quickly. The first section, just like she said, is the chemistry and physics. This will cover general chemistry, organic chemistry. That is all you have to know in regards to the chemistry section. In regards to physics, it will cover a wide variety of topics such as fluid dynamics, electrochemistry, and some other topics. For the biology and biochem section, you can encounter biochemistry, cell and molecular biology, genetics. There's a wide variety of topics. For the cars section, it will be a bunch of reading passages and comprehension passages on purposefully confusing topics. And what I mean by that is a lot of the times these cars passages are meant to be very out of order, to be very, very jarring and confusing to read, and that's because they want to test you on how quickly and how effectively you can handle new content that just doesn't make sense to the previous schema of what reading should be like. And the last section will be psychology, sociology, and biological foundations. My personal favorite section was the psychology section just because it is the most interesting in my opinion. What about you guys?
I can tell you my least favorite section is just the cars section. I don't know what's the best way to prepare for that. What I've heard is the best way to prepare for it is just to read a lot before test date and just kind of enhance your speed reading skills and retention skills. But I don't know, what do you think?
My least favorite was also definitely the cars. I scored highest in the Chem Phys section, so I guess that would be my favorite. Honestly, I don't find the test very fun at all, so I wouldn't say that I have a favorite section, but cars is definitely my least favorite.
All right, now getting into how to prepare for the MCAT. So I think the best way to start preparing for the MCAT is making sure you're taking the right courses. So on the AAMC website, it'll list all the courses that you need to take to be prepared for the MCAT. Some of these courses include organic chemistry, biochemistry, psychology, sociology, some English classes, some other biology classes that will help you, such as cell bio. So make sure to take those classes before you take the MCAT, just so you have a good foundation. Other than that, purchasing study materials such as Kaplan or Exam Crackers books could really help you fill in some knowledge gaps. What do you think about those study?
So this is a little bit of a tough subject to talk about. I'm going to be as unbiased as I can, just because obviously there is a little bit of bias just with the company I work for. But I think all the companies are great in their own way. They all have their own pros and cons. So what I'm going to talk about is a class versus not taking a class. I'm sure many of you guys have seen ads for taking these MCAT classes and stuff. And there's definitely pros and cons. I do understand there is a big financial cost to taking these classes. I believe most of them are a couple of $1,000s each, and it is a very big time commitment. But as someone who teaches one of these classes, I can honestly tell you it is completely worth it. If not just for having someone there who can walk you through any difficult questions, it's also mainly studying in that group environment. That's, in my opinion, the biggest benefit of those classes. And just like I mentioned earlier, while me and Richard were studying together for the MCAT, having that group environment, having someone to talk to during the difficult questions, and being able to bounce our ideas and our strategies off of the questions off of one another really did make a world of difference when it came to studying. And I really do think it greatly improved our performance. And that's the same thing I see in my students' performance when they're able to talk with one another and explain to each other why they got something wrong and help break down the concepts to one another. Their studying techniques becomes that much more efficient. It's amazing to see.
And I think one of the most important things when studying for the exam is that a lot of students have the information for the exam that they need to know, but a lot of students don't know how to take the exam. And I feel like the best way to prepare for that is just practice questions and practice exams. So the AAMC offers a lot of practice exams as well as other testing companies. I think this is by far the best way to prepare for the exam because you can kind of see how questions are asked, and also being able to take a test under the time limits that you'll see on test date. What do you think, Richard?
I personally thought that practice questions were the most effective way to study. Teebro and I used a resource called UWorld. It's a website. There's a free version of it and a paid version of it, but honestly paying for the full resource was worth it in my opinion. With UWorld, I was able to learn a lot of material while studying and answering questions, just because the explanations, whenever you got it right or wrong, were just so thorough. And I definitely think that's a resource that everyone should at least check out or consider, but it definitely helped me in my studying.
On the topic of fees, it's no big surprise the MCAT is expensive. From what I mentioned earlier about the MCAT classes, those cost a couple $1,000s, and you've got the books, which can easily set you back another couple $100s, plus your practice tests, which can set you back another couple $100s, plus the actual test itself is $320, and add in the fact that the time you're probably going to lose if you're studying for the MCAT in terms of if you have a part-time job, the income you're going to be losing from that. And in addition, if you do have to take that MCAT again, that's another $320 you're going to be spending. In regards to all that, the AMC actually has a really cool service called the Fee Assistance Program. Now, because the way that this program works is if your family income is 400% or less of the 2019 national poverty level for that family size, and this is all listed on the AMC website, by the way. So there's a table for however big your family size is and what income level would qualify you for financial assistance program. What they'll do is the AMC will greatly reduce the cost of the MCAT for you. They will offer their bundles at no cost and a bunch of other financial benefits, which is amazing of the AMC to do so. So if you're one of those students who is worried about how they're going to pay for their MCAT and their MCAT studying material, this is definitely a great resource to check out. Once again, that is the AAMC Financial Assistance Program. Okay, and now jumping back to study tips, something else that I can't emphasize enough is the importance of taking these practice tests, because these practice tests will prepare you for actual sit down on the exam. It's one thing to take these questions and practice them in intervals at your own pace, but it's another thing to sit down and take these 7.5-hour practice tests and really get yourself ready for the endurance test that the MCAT actually is. So in regards to that, the AAMC sells practice tests that are the absolute closest to what the actual MCAT will look like, and these are your absolute best resource. Now, coming from someone who actually works for a third-party company, I can tell you no third-party company's practice tests come close to the AAMC's. A lot of them are extremely high quality, do not get me wrong, but the most accurate in terms of predicting your score will be the AAMC's, so you want to save those practice tests for near the end of your study time and your study sessions. So ideally, if you have like a 2-month study schedule, then try to do all your third-party practice exams that first month and save your last practice exams, which should be the AAMC's, in that last month of studying, and try to space them out about 1 week on a weekly basis. So these AAMC exams should be able to predict your performance on the MCAT within about a 3-point range. And actually, speaking of points, let's go over the point system for the MCAT real quick, because it is a little bit of a doozy. So each of the 4 sections, when combined up, they can give you a total score ranging from 472 to 528. And we know that sounds like a really weird scale, but the reason for that is so that way the median score will be 500, a nice even round number. Now, the important thing about the MCAT is that it is a percentile-based score. So your score, the number you get, depends on how many questions you got right in comparison to all the other people who took that exam alongside with you. So because of that, there's no set amount of questions that will get you a 528, or there's no set amount of questions that'll get you a 520. It just depends on how everyone else did and how you did on that exam. So this means if you had a particularly easy exam, don't think that means your score will be higher than anyone else's. It just depends on how everyone else did. So anything to add on that?
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. And one question that a lot of students ask is that how many practice tests should I take before I should feel ready for exam day? And studies show that once a student can achieve test scores in their desired range of scores on multiple tests in a row, they should be confident on test day. The AAMC, again, the practice test will be your best bet on producing scores that are most accurate to what you're going to get on test day. So if you can score pretty accurately and consistently on those AAMC practice tests, I think you should feel pretty confident going into test day. Now, the MCAT is not the only determining factor in whether or not you'll get into med school, but a lot of students like to score high on their MCAT because it can make up for a bad GPA, or it can make up for not having as many extracurriculars as they would have wanted. Nationally, the average applicant MCAT was 504.7, and the average matriculant MCAT was 510.4.
Now, given that the MCAT is a percentile-based score, this means the average MCAT score is around 500. And just like Ashish was saying earlier, the MCAT isn't the only thing medical schools look at, but it is one of the most important factors because a lot of schools use MCAT scores as a screening factor. So while schools really do care about who you are holistically, they care about your interview performance, your letters of recommendation, your extracurricular activities, and those are the highest ranked factors. At the end of the day, the MCAT does act as a screening tool because even if you have the world's best application, even if you've managed to cure cancer like 17 times, a lot of times if you don't have an MCAT score of a certain range or a certain threshold, the school might screen you out, and you do not want that. You do not want your hard work into your extracurriculars and what you've done for your community going to waste just because your MCAT score wasn't as high as you wanted.
One of the reasons why the MCAT is so highly valued is that it's a predictor for your Step 1 scores. So med schools want to have students with a high MCAT score because it'll predict their success in med school and eventually placing into a residency.
Another reason why the MCAT is so highly favored by admissions officers is just because it provides an objective way for schools to compare the academic achievements and abilities of students at that current point in time. Just because the individual grading policies of professors can vary so greatly, and in addition, the individual grading policies of universities can vary so greatly in regards to giving students high scores or low scores. For example, I'm sure you guys have all encountered that one professor who seemed to make it his or her goal to fail as many students as possible, and because of that, your GPA might be deflated, or on the other hand, you might have encountered a lot of professors who kind of just gave everyone an A, and that really doesn't reflect on your understanding of the material at all.
Yeah, I agree with that. And as mentioned before, the average matricular MCAT was around a 510. And just because the average is a 510 does not mean you can't get into a med school if your score is lower than that. Each med school has their own score averages and their own requirements. So wherever you fall in the range of MCAT scores, there's a perfect med school for you somewhere.
Exactly. And at the end of the day, remember, that is just one score. It does not define your academic ability. It does not define anything about you as a future physician. All it says is how you did on one test on one day of your life. But still, take the exam seriously and try your best. And for final tips, I would avoid the people on Instagram and YouTube who call themselves med school coaches or admissions counselors or MCAT coaches. I personally believe there's no need for that at all. If you do decide you want to have a more structured studying schedule, go with an actual accredited class, go with a Kaplan class or an exam crackers class, go with an Altius class. These are just a variety of third-party companies that have proven to be effective and have effective and experienced counselors on stage and instructors on stage to help you through your MCAT experience. Don't trust any third-party individuals who seem kind of shady. That's my biggest piece of advice.
Yeah, and just to kind of reiterate what we said before, make sure you take the appropriate classes before studying for the MCAT. Make sure you study well in advance. I'd recommend probably 3 or 4 months in advance. Take many practice tests and save your AAMC practice tests for closer to your exam date. Anything else to add, Richard?
And definitely develop a rigorous study schedule, one that you know you'll be able to stick to, and decide if you want to study alone or with a partner, because there are definitely benefits with both.
And finally, try to enjoy your time studying for it, because honestly, studying for the MCAT wasn't that bad. It's one of the few times in undergrad where it's just you and the content. You don't have to worry about any outside factors like a professor's weird grading scale or group members not pulling up their own weight for a lab project or something, or some weird requirements for a lab report. It's just you and how well you understand the concepts. You will get to make your own study schedule, and at the end of the day, it is kind of interesting, kind of fun. Did you guys ever take that away from the exam?
Yeah. I really put a lot of emphasis on getting a really good score, and that just stressed me out way more than it should have. But the MCAT, it is long and it is grueling, but it is still just a test, so you got to keep that in mind at the end of the day.
And it was also one of the few times in the undergrad experience that we personally, and we don't know about other institutions, that we got to encounter really medical stuff while in our studies. Because a lot of the times, the content you encounter in your classes might be meant more for a research scale or for individuals going into those research or industrial pathways. But all the passages on the MCAT are related to medicine. And all the content is in some way trying to relate itself to medicine. So it is actually cool getting to learn about how all this stuff relates to disease and stuff and all these different applications. And it is kind of pretty cool reading those passages in the MCAT and seeing the relations to medicine in all these cool new ways.
That's true. All right. Well, thanks for listening to our podcast. Stay tuned to our next podcast where we'll talk about extracurriculars.